It's Friday, March 21st, 2014, and this is the Product Mentor. Today we're joined by one of our mentors, Calvin Chu, Managing Director of RGA Accelerator, powered by Techstars. They've also had some really great announcements that he might even briefly talk about to us tonight. He's going to lead a talk on tactical outsourcing. So let me just briefly explain the format for those of you joining us for the first time tonight. I'm Jeremy. I'm the moderator, also known as the product guy, who will be kind of guiding a little bit of this talk tonight. And we're joined by some mentors and mentees that you see along the bottom of your screen. Hey guys, wave hi. There we go. Yep, they're still alive. That's a good sign. And so I'm gonna briefly go around. We'll do some brief introductions, and as there are questions that are coming up, feel free to post questions to Google Moderator, and I will bring them to Calvin as soon as they come in. And it's just going to be a great conversation around tactical outsourcing tonight. So first, let me just start with William. William, could you just briefly tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi everybody, my name is William Doyle Capitman. I'm a product manager at Dice.com out in San Francisco. We help connect tech professionals with tech companies. I am a mentee in this program. Excited to hear what you guys say, Calvin.
And Carlos.
Hello everybody, Carlos Kino. I am a digital producer. I have been making digital products here in New York for the startup scene for the last 3 years. I am not officially a product manager, but I act as one more often than I should. So this is definitely a great eye-opener for me on various levels.
Excellent. And I'm going to hand it over to Calvin to briefly introduce himself, and then I've got a few more comments that I'm going to make, and then throw it right back to Calvin. So Calvin, just a quick intro.
All right. I currently work for Techstars, and I run the RGA Accelerator in New York City. And what I do is, currently what I do is I invest in startup companies, and particularly product-oriented Internet of Things / connected devices, hardware tech companies. Prior to this, was doing university spin-outs, and then before that, a long career doing product management in the Silicon Valley. So, so some of what I'm going to be doing the talk on tonight is basically a roll-up of a lot of that experience, and also some of the recent stuff that I've seen from the companies that I have in my portfolio as well.
Cool. Excellent. And I'm going to just quickly see we were just joined by David, so I'm going to just quickly throw over to him so he can just do a brief intro of himself. So David, when you intro, just remember to unmute yourself.
Is it Dave Schoenberger you're looking to speak to?
Yep.
Okay. Hey guys, I'm Dave Schoenberger. I'm a product mentor. And do you want more than that, or is that it for the moment?
I'm good unless you wanted to add anything else.
I'm director of product for a healthcare startup called NeoCare that's owned by Healthogen that is also owned by Aetna. And
Excellent.
that's all I've got. Thank you.
That's good. That's good. Thanks. So for everyone, so Calvin is going to start talking about his topic soon. Just keep your questions coming on in. And as they come in, I'll make sure I'll jump in, pause Calvin, and get your questions to him and get them all answered. So the talk will last for everything will last about an hour. We're expecting to wrap around 8. So definitely join us, enjoy the conversation that we've got. Post your questions to Google Moderator. I've got that open on my screen, and I'm always looking at that. And once again, I'm Jeremy Horn, the product guy. I'll be moderating tonight. And with all that said, let me hand it over to Calvin to talk to us about tactical outsourcing.
All right, great. And the slide deck is going to come up, so you'll have to excuse some of the strangeness to it since I'm running this Google Hangout on the Mac. So let me try to pull that up and get that going. All right, y'all see that? All right.
Yep, we're good. We're good.
All right, fantastic. So, here we go. All right, so tactical outsourcing. So just kind of as a brief, kind of a higher level thing. So I'd like to start with an analogy. So when governments go to war, and what happens is when these officers in command at the top of the military go to work out their strategic goals, it's usually based on a set of requirements, right? Their understanding of what they're trying to achieve. It's often going to have some success criteria, how to market to media, how to deal with the media, and so on. And it's, in the world of business, we often get a lot of military analogies, and broadly speaking, the kind of strategic goals or strategy corresponds to the planning, coordination, and general direction of operations to meet objectives. And in the analogy to product management, this corresponds to the MRD and PRD that a lot of you work with. And then for those that aren't yet in product management and you're just looking to get into it, the MRD is a market requirements document, and then the PRD is a response to that, which specifies a product that meets the conditions in the MRD, and together they constitute kind of the strategic documents that product managers work on. And what tactics are in this context is for the military, it's really those short-term decisions, often involving people, whether they're hired militants or whatever that end up getting involved, and often involve specific technologies and time frames. So for what product managers need to do in an ideal world is basically use the MRD and PRD to arbitrate and work out how to get the product on in the context of the internal corporate environment. But for the purpose of this talk, it's the world is not always clean, and sometimes you have to go outside to get certain things done. So just as generals have to bring in allies or mercenaries or pay locals on the ground to handle certain functions, there are techniques that product managers could bring into play too. And for the purpose of this talk, it's really I'm really going to focus on the RFP/RFQ type technique for going out to get really good quality people on board to help execute portions of the product. So there we go. So my product management experience is for technology products. I know that not all of the folks who attend Product Meetup are working with technology products. So if you see something weird that doesn't apply to you, just let me know. But I think in general, these techniques could be used for just about any product. But I'm willing to be I'm willing to stand corrected on anything that doesn't apply. So first of all, generally speaking, companies outsource for a variety of reasons. So it typically comes down to people, money, and risk. So sometimes, with regards to people, you don't have all the resources you need to successfully launch the product on time, right? Or you don't have the resources to get the product out on budget or whatever. And most often it's people more than anything else. Sometimes the company has the people, but they lack the expertise. They might not have the specific kinds of engineers or other kinds of experts that are needed. And then sometimes it doesn't even make sense to hire a person with a specific set of expertise. because they're needed for only a few months, and then after that, they don't really have a real need for them for a while. So so that plays into kind of the resource allocation type thing that inevitably comes in after the PRD launches, and then a lot of times the time to hire can be a factor. So I know that in just the last few months, I've made several offers over weeks, and they would always end up getting turned down because they've been snatched by somebody else. And if there's a time critical product delivery that has to happen, then trying to hire people and onboard them can take a lot of time, and that introduces a lot of problems. And secondly, money, right? This can be easy to understand, but it can be tricky. A lot of people go down the path of outsourcing because of the perceived affordability, and I'll talk more about the money thing in a later part of the press. But so it is easy to figure out, but it also isn't. And finally, there's risk. So so there's often times when the risk of failure can be fairly great. Sometimes the product involves safety features or specialty engineering that could put lives at risk or something of that sort, where you might not want to involve your own folks, right? So by way of example, I'll talk about one of the products that I worked on kind of early in my career, and it was for a very large oil pipeline company. And the product was a really sophisticated end-to-end control and energy trading system, and it wasn't Enron, just to point that out. But how it worked was that different liquid petroleum products would be pushed through the pipeline. And there's one pipeline, for example, that connects one state to another state. So if you need to move gasoline and then jet fuel, it all ends up going into the same pipe. So they have a system that's very much like shifting internet packets from one place to another. They shove different things in, and then like for example, they'll send in gasoline and then diesel fuel and then jet fuel and other things, and then where the products touch, they end up mixing up, and it creates an invalid product that's in between the two valid slugs of material that's going through the pipeline. And one part of the system required the software to automatically determine that slug of mixed up incompatible material and then reject it using a switch. And the way they did it was they plugged some sensors in which looked at the molecular composition of it, and at that point we're all a bunch of regular developers, and this was like really high-tech science at that point. So we ended up outsourcing the neural network artificial intelligence needed to work out the molecular composition of the stuff in the pipe, and then basically dump the junk out to a big holding tank, essentially. So it wasn't something we were willing to risk the entire project on, and we ended up outsourcing it. So there's a lot of reasons to do it, not always having to deal with people or money, right? So it's sometimes like everything to do with risk as well. So everyone with me so far? All right, great. It's just it's weird when it's me in a room by myself just talking. So
we're all with you, Calvin, and we got a lot more people online that are too.
All right, fantastic. So now let me talk about why you shouldn't do it. So first of all, if you're a startup, if you're doing a lot of outsourcing, right? Particularly if you're doing nearly all the product or all the product entirely outside of the company, that it devalues the company, actually. So that's one thing you should be aware of, because you're not building the internal expertise. right? And the second thing is if you're seeking money, either currently or in the future, then investors will worry about intellectual property, whose expertise are they investing in really, right? And when you're seeking funding for a startup, it often comes back to the question of why are they investing in this set of people, right? You often hear that investors invest in the people, and then if it turns out that none of them are doing the work, right, and you outsource in a not so good way, so that you essentially lose some control over the product as well. It kind of has a pretty poor impact on the startup company as a whole. Now, it's a bit different equation for large companies, right? But definitely putting IP at risk is always kind of a concern. So, particularly the IP or the software or the expertise will end up finding its way into other things, and it's at the base of it, if you have developers working on something, then they're going to learn how to do that, so that maybe in the future there'll be advertising that they're able to do such things, and then they might end up hooking up with a competitor or some other product. Or somebody could take your stuff after they find out you're successful and then white label it or other label it, and cause you grief later. So it's important to be cognizant of what it is you're asking people to do. So if those are really strong concerns, you probably shouldn't do it, right? And then like another thing is you shouldn't take the MRD/PRD, find an agency or a single entity, and just send the whole thing out and have that entirely handled outside the company. That's probably one of the worst things you can do, because it impacts the control and the control of the product, because where product managers in particular should be is they're at an arbitration point between all the major portions of a product company, right? That would be marketing, sales, customer support, engineering. So they need to be fully cognizant of all the decisions, and just pushing it entirely out there, can be one of the worst things to do. So I don't really recommend it. You should never farm out the strategy or the MRD or PRD documents, because that's the heart of the product.
Actually, I wanna just jump in briefly, Calvin. I've got a question from Carlos. I'm gonna hand it over to Carlos to ask his question briefly.
So Calvin, real quick, I was wondering, what are some of your major deterrents? Like, one of the reasons why, immediately, we're not outsourcing this, something that immediately turns you off from the option, from a personal level.
Like what turns me off of outsourcing?
If I'm gonna outsource something, you're working on a project, and is there any one reason why you would be like, no, we can't outsource this?
So I guess one of the first things that should give you pause is if you're pushing out nearly all of it to somebody, to one particular entity, for example, right? So that causes most of the control of the product to be pushed off elsewhere, right? And it's not always the case, but that's kind of a warning sign, right? And you would basically be waiting for nearly the entire thing from a single entity, right? There's nothing much for you to coordinate, and you won't have much visibility into what's happening with the product. So that's typically not a good thing to do, but especially if you're a product company. Now, if you're doing a prototyping project or some kind of skunkworks thing within the context of a larger company, that happens sometimes, because the risk isn't really there for what would happen if that gets lost. Probably not a big deal. So sometimes that does happen. So there are good reasons and bad reasons, but the main thing is really what are you putting at risk when you shove most of it out there? Now, it's best to take portions and then divide it out, and that's basically what this talk is going to be concerned with. Just how do you cut these things apart, and then what are the logistics and operationally, how do you do?
Excellent. So I just wanted to add. So that's all the questions we have at the moment. I'm going to throw it back to you, Calvin. But just for everyone else who's watching the live stream, feel free to post your questions to Google Moderator, and I will be sure to jump in and get Calvin to answer those for you as well. And with that said, let me hand it back to Calvin to continue.
All right. So let's see. Where was I? Right. So there we go. Okay. Let's see the portion. All right. So here we go. So let's go. If you remember that bubble diagram there with the strategic bits. So when you're working on your PRD, right? Here are the common sections that I'm sure everyone will recognize, right? Who are the stakeholders? What's the purpose of the product? Features, release criteria, time frame. So the two critical sections that comes into play when you're subdividing stuff out and using like an RFP or RFQ mechanism to go and outsource stuff out is going to be stakeholders and the features, right? So release criteria and time frame, get a tip of a hat, but I think the stakeholders and features is the kind of the big thing you need to really think about. So it's, in my opinion, if any outsourcing is involved, you have to involve all the stakeholders or nearly all of them, and then ideally all the stakeholders are brought into into a room to explain why it would be beneficial to do it. And among these stakeholders should include the engineering side of the company. So especially if you're outsourcing things that are encroaching on their territory. Now there's a lot of outsourcing that involves things like taking PSDs and converting them to web pages and things like that might not be as big of a deal, but nonetheless, you should always get the buy-in from the engineering side. So the thing is product managers don't always have control oversight related to most parts of the other parts of the company, right? So always, if you're doing a joint internal and outsource type thing, you have to be very clear about what ends up going internal and what ends up going out for bid to get to basically get a freelancer or some group from the outside to work on things. And how it complicates product management is you're essentially looking for two engineering responses in a way, and then you have to coordinate those two together. So having the engineering side of the company on board with it, the in-house engineering team helping you through this process is going to be a big deal. So you don't want situations where you have some people that are not cool with it, kind of sabotaging stuff along the way, right? That would end up causing missed deliveries, quality issues, all kinds of things that you should consider. And then for some startups, they don't have an internal engineering team at all, in which case then you still involve all the stakeholders, but it's perhaps a little less complicated. Then it becomes more of a question of how to coordinate the hopefully different external outsourcing teams that you'll be working with. So
actually, right there, I got a question, Calvin, from David. in the room, so I'm going to hand it over to David to ask you his question.
Okay.
David, you're muted.
All right, I'm muted and I can't even find the video. Here we go. Hey, everybody. Hey, Calvin, how's it going? So my question is this. I'm always curious about how somebody who's done this for a while is able to move management
It's cutting out.
to see to come to their perspective, especially when it comes to outsourcing. So what are some a recalcitrant management team and get them onto your onto your wish, which is to say, how do you get them to appreciate that outsourcing is actually a good idea? And then sometimes, how can you tell them when it's not a good idea when they come to you with the proposition?
Right. So, just in my opinion, there's a couple of different ways. Right. The first is going back to that other slide. It's understanding what you want to get out of it, and for example, if it involves risk, right? There's a portion of the product. There's a module that it's just too risky to engineer internally because of lack of expertise, lack of people, right? The time it takes to hire a person like that, right, could basically push the product to a late delivery, right? So,
right.
Those are some of the possible issues you can pull up. And especially if you go, well, if we just put out the bid, we don't have to choose any of the bids, right? It can be a strong alternative while you go and seek out hiring, or perhaps try to find someone to train up from internal, but you have to weigh that against the quality of the product that you want to end up with, and whether you want the product to ship on budget, on time, right? So if you're doing a finance product, you don't want to re-engineer the whole credit card, fulfillment chain, right? So you want to go and take something from the outside, right? So that can be done with an RFQ. You just hit up a whole bunch of people and you go, like, quote me, to get your module into my system, right? That's not the best example, but you're basically leveraging something that other people have solved, right? Or people that have solved similar problems before. So why you shouldn't do it if someone comes to you, and sometimes you do have engineering departments that have a not invented here syndrome, right? We've all seen it, right? If it's not invented by us, it's not as good, right? And they want to do it because it's cool. They want to do it because it's a tough challenge or whatever. But you as a product manager have to go and basically work out what's the risk of doing that, right? If it's going to cause the product to go off the rails, so that you have now money being thrown in, and then features never seeing the light of day, right? When in actuality there are tons of people who have done it before, and you can get access to them, right? Then that's something to consider, and basically the reasons I mentioned before on why not to do it. If you're a startup and you're putting the most valuable portions, right? Sometimes you want your engineering team to basically cut their teeth on. So that's something you want to consider, because when you go up to the investors and you go, look, these guys are experts and they've done it, and we've got them as founders or
right.
employees, and that's a big deal.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. So there's that's it for the questions at the moment. Again, keep the questions coming in through Google Moderator. We've got some good questions flowing in. And with that said, back to you, Calvin.
All right. So a bit on the process. So that you've probably seen something like this, right? You can either do something, on time, on budget, or done extremely well, and you have to pick two. Right. So when you go out to proceed sectioning the PRD into one or more RFQs, right? Your job here is to figure out ways to divide and conquer, right? So here, if you have an internal, like a CTO or an engineering staff, it's helpful to get their input on ways that you can reasonably divide and conquer. So the aspects of tactical outsourcing is involved is really finding the most optimal way to divide out the project. And it helps to know ahead of time why you're doing it. Is it for optimizing for speed, budget, or quality? And generally, you can pick two, right? So, when you create an RFQ that's asking for bids, then it should be abundantly clear what you're looking for from the freelancers you'll be selecting from. So you should actually say, like, we're trying to do this on a budget, or with decent speed or whatever, and it's okay to sacrifice quality because it's a pilot prototype, right? Or you can go and say that you want something done with really decent quality because we only have the money to do this one time, and it has to make it into production, right? So you have to make it clear with yourself and any other stakeholders that the guiding principles on what's going into that RFP/RFQ. So I think as an example, one of the companies that I've invested in that's in my accelerator, they have a really sophisticated product. It has hardware, it has cloud infrastructure, it has front ends on the iPad, on a website, on an iOS app, and Android, and all of that stuff. So it's really stacked up, right, in terms of what's in there. So for them, speed is a big issue, and quality is important as well. So they don't have unlimited budget, but they subdivide out certain sections that they know they can spend a little more on in order to specifically get more stuff in play in parallel, and then those things that are cut out are simple enough that they can be delivered on time. So as you know, if it's something simple you're looking for, it's much more likely that it'll come back on time. So for them, they could have divided things up by technology layer. They could have had outsourced people responsible for say the MongoDB only, or the middleware that's in C++ only, or whatever. Or they could have structured it by function so that they could have an outsourced freelancer or group that's handling just like the data collection or the analytics, right? And that could be cross stack basically. So and it's how they decide to go do that is it varies, right, depending on how important each of those pieces are, and they've actually done an incredible job of that. So I've actually checked in on them just because I was so impressed by how they did their outsourcing. They've come in at the beginning with just 3 people, and by month 3 they have possibly close to 20 people, like mostly on the outside, and a few more additions internally to cause their product to build out. So it's just and for them, speed is a big deal. So that doing the outsourcing this way is a tremendous help. So, and then where are people going to do this kind of outsourcing? And I'll talk about what the RFP process looks like in the coming slides. So where are people headed? So these are some of the places, like Gun.io, freelancer.com, and then there's some other unorthodox places as well. Like just asking around friends and family, taking on interns, things like that falling into the general bucket of any people that aren't part of your company that are given tasks and functions to do falls under outsourcing. For the sorts of things that I'm typically referring to, it's going to be things like Gun.io, Freelance, or Elance, and at this time, I think Elance is still the best, in my opinion. They have the best tools, best rating system. They have a really great escrow mechanism for holding payment, so that one side, the side doing the work, knows that the money does exist, and then the other side knows the money won't be released until the delivery criteria is fulfilled, right? And then with, I think, almost 10 million people on the site that's out there looking to get work. There's a lot of people out there all around the world that you could acquire bids from. So my one comment is among some of the tools that Elance has includes this tracker view where once someone agrees to do the work, you could basically turn on this tracker on them where you're tracking every keystroke and how many mouse wiggles there are, and in my opinion, don't bother with it because it becomes an issue of trust, and you always want to trust that entire ecosystem of outsourced people that are working for you. So trust but verify, but don't monitor, and don't be the CIA. And one more thing on interns, there are actually quite strict laws about what you can and can't do with interns, what you ought to pay them, that sort of thing. And that's beyond the scope of this talk, but certainly that's something you should Google and check out. The main thing being that there are a lot of people out there looking for jobs, and they might take on interning type situations when in fact they're actually experts in certain areas, and you don't want to get in trouble with certain entities here, the government in particular, and the government's looking to see whether you're in fact training them, right? And although they could be doing work that's useful, they're primarily looking to see if you're in fact training them, and that those folks are actually seeking other work and taking on other assignments outside of your tasks that you're assigning to them. So just be careful there. You don't want to run afoul of anything. So
yeah, there's probably lots of things we shouldn't be doing with interns. I'm jumping in right now because I've got a question from someone. Not sure what their full name is, but they're showing up as ThinkX. And the question from this person is: Have you tried to present these insights in a project autopsy?
In a project autopsy?
Yep.
I'm not sure what that is.
Maybe like a project postmortem.
Oh, right. I believe I have at different points, right? It's been some time, and certainly all the companies that I've invested in recently, they're all still working on their stuff, so there's not really an opportunity to get a postmortem. And then all the experiences I've had, good or bad, it's always in situations where I'm basically the founder, so I would basically just be talking to myself. So I haven't done a formal postmortem of that sort. Hopefully that answers the question.
I think so. And talking to yourself can't be bad. And with that, so that's all the questions right now. So Calvin, feel free to continue, and everyone else, keep the questions coming in through the productmentor.com/live and our Google Moderator channel.
All right. So, and just kind of a quick note for obviousness sake. When you get onto Elance, you'll eventually hit this screen, right? Creating your job. Basically, your RFQ goes into this spot, right? Typically as a short description plus the attachment. It goes into the attachment. So just in case it's not too obvious. And a lot of people just go and describe some basic thing, and I would warn against that, because this would be one of the places where things go awry with ELANS projects, when you don't sufficiently describe things. And I think most of what we do as product managers is to describe things to the extent necessary to make things happen the way we want, right? And you don't want to mess that up at this point, right? So the work that you do that goes into creating the RFQ would go in here, and also bumps up the seriousness of these kind of jobs, so that when you get bids, you'll get a higher level of bid, a more thoughtful bid that comes in, than if you just dumped a bunch of words into the describe it section. So the next bit is on communications glue. So regardless of outsourcing, product manager is still the arbitrator or hub of the product. Customer, sales, marketing, support, engineering, all of that stuff. It eventually has to pass through you, and what isn't in the document ends up in the document, right? So when everybody's internal, that's not an impossible task. It can be annoying, but it's not an impossible task. And then with outsourcing now, it's almost critical that you have to have some special tools to make it more effective. And with a note that if you have an in-house engineering team, there's going to be a lot of stuff that ends up being moved over to that side of things. So just be aware of that. And oftentimes, if your company's big enough and you have a project manager, then there's going to be some folks watching the timetables as well, basically helping juggle a bunch of stuff going on outside. But it helps if you're getting started in all this to have already scoped out the mechanisms needed to do the communications. So I think the main thing here is, here's a few of the popular choices for coordinating people and so on, having meetings across, sovereign country boundaries and things like that. Just like we're on Skype video, you can make use of tools like this to basically sync a whole bunch of different groups working together with your company. So some of the important things is you have to have regular meetings. You have to talk, at least on a weekly basis, and create a group meeting online where if you have multiple people working on different RFPs and entering into different modules and different projects, they should be together, right? And then the other thing is, as part of communications glue, is if you are subdividing, it's very important to have your APIs strictly defined well ahead of time. That the interface boundaries are one of the more typical failure points. That if you don't define how the APIs work, or how what the formats are, or how things get moved from one place to another, when things begin to join, it can get pretty ugly out there. If you have somebody working in Russia, another person who can barely speak English in Italy, or whatever, and they're finally trying to get stuff together, that's all on you. You have to get stuff defined well. So be aware of that, and then have that communications platform. Make sure everybody's on it, right? So pick one that everyone can have access to, no matter where they are in the world, and that the communications work well. So I threw up those examples up there. I'm sure you have your own favorites, but just make sure that you check in with engineering too, because at some point it'll interface with your internal engineering. If they have a tool too, look into that as well. So and then the next thing is make sure that all the people involved have a general synopsis of the system. You don't have to give every detail about about the system to everybody. that often overwhelms people. It causes them to learn things and take time when they shouldn't need to be. So you don't want to overwhelm all the different sub-projects going on. They have to have the synopsis of the system. They have to understand why you're doing it so that they're all correctly aligned. But you don't want to shoot out too much information overall. But any sections that are just fully described in the RFPs, RFQs that are being worked on independently, they have to own those portions of the work, right? So as the product manager, you're functioning as kind of a general. So you own the strategy, you own the strategic view, and then you want anyone who's working on stuff outside to have really strong ownership of the work that they're doing, right? So and then the next thing is automate. I guess I'm not going in order here. Is automate quite a lot. So if you're doing some kind of agile development, which is recommended, you want stuff to always be checking in and then automatically going out to be compiled and deployed to a testing server of some kind, that sort of thing. So make sure that it's automatic, because you don't want to have to be the bottleneck. You don't want anyone in your company to be a bottleneck, especially if you're going across time zones. Stuff should check in, right? And maybe they don't have visibility over other people's source code, but it should compile and push out automatically. And maybe that breaks things sometimes, but you want things to break until they're functioning properly. So you don't want to over manage those kind of choke points. And let me see. So all right. So one quick rule of thumb.
Actually, I want to just jump in there really briefly, Calvin. I've got a question from Spencer. And Spencer says, Courses allows companies to outsource its systems engineering expertise to our team of experts at 60% cost to building its own team. We recommend using outsourcing when it accelerates the company's product development roadmap. And it's just, it looks like they're looking to see what you think of that.
Right. So kind of going back to the questions of, is it time, budget, or something else, right? So if it's speed and quality, maybe it'll actually cost more, right? Particularly if, let's say, you need a machine learning expert, right? And then you outsource that to Russia, where they might have a whole bunch, right? So it might end up costing more, right? But you get something delivered on time, right? So there's a lot of different reasons why you'd want to do it. You just have to be honest with yourself as to what it is, right? So if it's money, right, that's a valid reason. So if it's money and speed, right, that's an additional possibility, right? It's you just have to understand what those reasons are. So it's not always money, by the way, right? And then even that's a complicated thing. I'll go over kind of the like the cost and stuff like that as well a little later.
Excellent. Back to you then.
All right. So here's the quick time rule of thumb, right? So for every 10 hours of work that you expect someone to do, you should probably have spent between 1 to 2 hours of work doing the requirements document, right? And it could be some combination of stuff you worked on in the PRD, and then you're retranslating it into an RFP. But it's roughly 10 to 20% of the time you're basically specifying things pretty well, and then probably about 30 minutes to an hour of that would be just communications overhead, right? So basically, if you have 20 hours of work, then you should probably have spent 2, 3, 4 hours of work getting that document together. And that document is a communications document. So it's if you fail to do it well at this point, right, then what it ends up doing is it creates a sloppy situation where the contracting work basically runs overtime, right? And then you run into situations where if you're doing it by the hour, then stuff begins to slip and cost more. Or if you do it on a fixed budget, then people start to get annoyed because it's something that you didn't ask for, or you asked incorrectly because you didn't spend the time on it. So it's kind of your job as product manager to properly lay out that 10 to 20% time to start with on all the different RFQs. So it's helpful to get some engineering help when needed, but it's something that if you do it right, then it'll go much more smoothly than if you either didn't do it at all or incorrectly. So you'll know it when you see this kind of feel for so you're doing a 30-minute meeting, and then they do 10 hours of work that week, then and everything's coming out correctly, then you're doing a pretty decent job. So the next section is what is a request for a quotation, RFQ, or RFP, a request for a proposal, and I'm going to show an example of one that I've done some time ago. Let me see if I can get that working. Excuse the pausing here. All right, so can you all see my Microsoft Word? All right, so I imagine you are. So here's one I did back when I was founder of Mobile Crossing, and I'm not going to hand up this document, but I'm happy to show what I've done here. So just as a matter of template type stuff, what was helpful to me is whenever you hand stuff out, you should be especially if you're handing out a lot of stuff, as I've done, is you should have project RFQ names. You should have a number beside it, just for your own tracking purpose, some kind of ID, dates, right? And then basically, the major parts should all be there, and I'll go over what all those major parts are. And for this particular document, I was doing a hardware device, which I wanted to have a feature in there that displays a photo, right, or a set of photos that are on the device to the screen, right? So what I had in here is some basic ground rules, what the expected response should be in order to be seriously considered, right? And then very clearly stated what it is that I'm trying to get out of this, right? So, and then kind of a business overview as to what's the point of doing all this, and what some of the base conditions that can't change, and then all the functional requirements, which I pulled out of one of my PRDs, right? And then and basically it goes into detail, and what's being asked for here is not how am I going to be telling you how to do, say, for example, full screen playback of a bunch of photos, or how you're going to be zooming in or whatever to a photo, right? I'm pushing that out to them because I expect them to be experts, and plus I don't want to be doing all that work. It's really setting the ground rules for what I'm looking for in the deliverable. So that's going to be kind of a common thing. So you have to go into at least this much detail, and the important thing that I find is always number and mark out the specific features and functions that are in your requirements, so that you're telling them to go and say, in the response back to me, I need you to address how you plan to do 1A, 1B, 1C, right? You're going to be looking for places where they perhaps left something out, right, on purpose, whatever, or also things where they respond and go, actually, you don't want to do 1D. Instead, you want to integrate that into something else, and that'll save time and money, right? So you're looking for a certain amount of pushback as well, but overall, you're expecting an organized response document back from the freelancer. Since I can't give that doc out, I'm going to send a template that I thought was pretty decent. I'll put that out on the chat window right there. It's kind of old, but it does have a lot of the major sections. Maybe not in the way that I prefer, but we can cover that. We can cover that a little bit.
And just for everyone else who can't see that chat, that link, I'll also post that link to the meetup page for anyone who's kind of come in through those channels. And the meetup page is at meetup.com/theproductgroup. And just look for this meetup there, and I'll post the link that Calvin just posted.
Right, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up that page too, so that you don't have to run around looking for it, right? So, the important thing to remember is that you can use this process for anything, right? That could be for setting up out-of-warranty repair service. You can do it for logo creation, branding work, basic market research, software development, really complicated machine learning or whatever, right? So it's basically whatever you pull out and slice out of the PRD for this purpose. That's what you should what you can do with it. So you can use this pretty generically for a lot of different things. So let's see. Trying to find my page numbers. All right. So again, what I mentioned before was ground rules, right? So in the thing that you push out, you have to make sure that the ground rules are pretty clear, right? So that people will see that you're a fairly detail-oriented product manager. They're gonna have a much better time working with you than someone who posts up a request for, say, an app that does financial trading on the markets or something like that. You set up the ground rules. You explain when all the proposals need to be back to you. You explain who the stakeholders are and what the process is for selection. So there's no mystery to it. The price here they state the price you quote should be inclusive, and if there's other fees, or a lot of times there's licensing on certain software modules, then it has to be explained, that sort of thing. So this document that will be sent out by Jeremy, it has the ground rule section split up into like several different parts, and I tend to like to put all the ground rules in one place, but there's not like like an exact science to this, but these are the major sections. So the next major section that you should look at is the objective, right? And the objective is the thing that you want to have delivered to you in the end, right? So here it's really subdividing out modules out of the PRD and putting them in, and then explaining it, and explaining how you're gonna get that back, right? And let me see. All right, so again, as you saw in my example before, you should have like a basic chapter style thing. It has everything numbered, and then it looks like a table of contents, and then following that section, it should have all the requirements spelled out in pretty decent detail. So, I mean, does it have to be crazy, right? These kind of documents tend to run just under a dozen, right? Under 10 pages, perhaps. And the sections that should go out, shouldn't be too long because you're trying to break things out into simple chunks. So just make sure you're not under requiring it. So remember, anything forgotten, not mentioned, under-explained, right, ends up with those, every 10 hours is basically going sloppy on you, right? So you could end up what you thought was 10 goes to 20 because you forgot something or you under-explained something, and then for whatever reason it was misinterpreted. So so make sure you get this section done pretty well. I think this example is kind of generic, right? But pretty well. It depends on what the product is and what module you're outsourcing out. So here is the place you need to spend probably most of the time, because any mess up here results in lost time, lost money, and slipped deliveries. So you can't control what you don't know that you know, but if you know it, put it in. If you know something that you don't know, then oh man, I'm confusing myself. So basically, make sure this section is properly detailed out. Let me see. Almost done here. Right. So there's often a section that says why things matter, why you should care, and it is a little bit important, because if you're trying to convince a developer to do something, it helps if they're excited about a project. So here within some portion of the document, it does have you should have some kind of synopsis of the overall view of the system. Let's see, one more thing is page 4 has this thing, timeline. So typically I consider that as part of the ground rules. So essentially, again, people should be pretty clear as to the time frames involved. That's if there's phases, you enter the phases. If there's the exact day you're going to be considering proposals, you have to set all that in there, just to be fair to everybody else. And let me see, in section 9. All right, so the scope and guidelines portions also gets, like, once you look at it, you can see that it would end up being driven quite a bit by the MRD and PRD. So bear that in mind as well. And then lastly, very important is evaluation criteria. So you should always be upfront about how and why you would be selecting a company, right? Like, for example, we're looking for the least expensive proposal or whatever. That's not what I would recommend to say. But what I do recommend is that you state that once you funnel through all the proposals, you're going to come down to the top 5. When you get to the top 5, then each one of the top 5 will be given a 1 to 2 hour project that's maybe related, maybe unrelated to the project at hand, and then all 5 will do it. And remember, these things take a lot of time to respond. An hour out of that is not a big deal. So make sure you have, like, basically an hour to 2 hour project. The top 5 candidates will go through that, and then that way you level the evaluation field, right? Because you're going to get back proposals like, I think you should do it in .NET, and it'll cost this much, and then another person might go, it can be done better in, with an entire, LAMP stack with these following, modules that I built before or whatever, right? So when you put in a minor 1 hour project, that it's a test of the engineering expertise, right? And then since they're all doing the same thing, you can compare them. So for something that you don't want to risk things on, that's very helpful. And then finally, when you do get down to, and you should state that you're doing like a jump through the hoop project, at the end, right? So so that way they're not surprised by that. And then lastly, what you don't need to put in the evaluation criteria is you should interview over Skype, video even, right? It's super important that anybody that you engage with are people that you'll be happy with. I think that a lot of people, you know, that they don't have a lot of great language skills, perhaps, but it might not be a big deal because you get along with them. They get things like right away, right? And a good example is there's a lot of people out there that do logos really well, right? And once you communicate that, then they get right to it, right? So so I know from talking to different people, some people really care a lot about English communication skills. It's not a big deal for me, and it's really up to you on that one. But the most important thing is really talking to people, interviewing them, making sure that the business end of the people that you're dealing with, if it's like a multi-person thing, are people that you're happy and you're not going to get frustrated by going into the project. So switch back to my deck, and then we're almost done.
Yeah, and so we just had a whole bunch of questions come in. So I'm going to read the first one to you from Jeff from San Francisco. And Jeff asks, how do you feel about medium to high fidelity prototyping to provide market context and visually describe the interactions if you want to cut down ambiguity and lengthy PRDs?
Right, so you're talking about you building a pretty decent looking prototype, right? And then putting it out there and then going, I want to do this thing, right? Yeah, I guess it's a possible thing, you know. But imagine if someone took like Bloomberg Terminal and said, I want you to do this thing, right? So it depends on the complexity, right? I think that it's fair that if you have the skills internally to do a prototype, but maybe you don't believe in the quality of your own code, you know, like, oh, you whipped it together really fast and it does what it says it does, but to scale it up, you need some experts in. That's a valid reason to bring people in. So in the document you put together, it should, if you have it, a link to, you know, all your wireframes, for example, or some kind of functional clickable thing, right? That's super helpful. You go, here's my reference design, right? We'll refer that as a reference, but what I'm looking for is still the following things. That way, at the end, right, you don't have a situation where there was a bug in the prototype, and then they replicate that perfectly, right? So you should be very clear that it's a reference only. If there are questions that differ from the from your document, they need to talk to you.
Excellent. And we've got one more question from William in the room, so I'm going to hand over to William.
Thanks, Jeremy. Hi, Calvin. My question is about firing a vendor. I know it's very subjective and there's lots of caveats that are project specific, but can you tell us at all about when, during a project, when it's going poorly, you decide to fire the vendor, and maybe give us some advice or techniques on how to salvage the project as a whole and not have everything be a sunk cost?
Right. So let's say you're using Elance, right? Elance has pretty good techniques for that. So I think once you have like these established criteria, the established criteria up, and then you have your money in escrow, and you're moving forward with a particular freelancer, and you make it clear when the stuff is delivered and what it is that you need to get delivery of in order for the criteria to be met so that they get paid. You want to get to a place where they missed that deadline, or they delivered something that doesn't meet the delivery requirements, and then that's when you can begin the cancellation and refund process. And you should do it as early as possible, right? Like, if it looks like it's going bad, right, then fire quickly and move forward elsewhere. Right? It's the reason why you're going with contractors and not employees, and it's it's something I've been kind of amazed to witness in the past 2 months, watching this one company hire and fire people on a weekly basis. So, and they've been performing really well, and they're looking for the best contractors to do this kind of stuff. So, if you divide out the projects small enough, right, then you're also distributing your risk, so that when you have someone do something small and they deliver, then you get like maybe something twice as big to them, right? So that when you're canceling, it doesn't necessarily put your entire system on the rocks. And that's why I advise against pushing out the entire project to one, vendor. That's something that almost inevitably you end up with something that you're unhappy with, and you have no recourse to, to cut off one portion of that and deliver it to somebody else after.
When you follow that strategy of pushing out a small piece of work and seeing what they deal with it, do you tell them explicitly there might be other things coming in the way, or do you just watch their performance?
You should, yeah. You go look. We'd love to, to get great work out of you, and we have a lot of work in the pipeline, and we're going to start with this. And there's more RFPs out there, that more portions of the project that will be moving, right? When it comes, we'll let you know, right?
Thanks, Calvin.
Great. Is that the last question on that?
That's the last question for the moment, but everyone should feel free to keep posting up the questions, and I'll keep jumping in. But for now, back to you, Calvin.
Right. So I hope that answers, like, what's an RFP, what's in it, what's it composed of, and so on. Let's see. So I covered all of these things when we're in the document, right? You should always explain why they should care, why they should be excited about the work. All the ground rules should be stated very clearly. The objective should be stated pretty clearly. And I've talked about numbering the individual sections. Any kind of feature or portion of the project you want them to specifically respond to and go, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to do it in Java. We're going to do it, in MongoDB instead of this other thing. You should number it so that way they're cognizant of each thing and responding to each thing. And as said before, explain, very clearly upfront how they're going to end up being selected, and recommendations funnel down to 5. Run the finalists through a hoop test, and then interview. And read the responses, right? So reading the responses will be somewhat educational, right? So you're going to see variances in what it's going to cost, differences in how they're going to engineer things, and you kind of learn a lot along the way, and you're going to end up asking one or the other, why would you do it that way instead of this way? Because you're going to see different responses, and you're looking for adequate reasons why. And I believe this might be my second to last or my last slide. So a bit about price, right? So I know somebody asked about, like, well, it's great to do it, or people can do it for 60% of what it costs to do it, to hire an employee, that sort of thing. So remember that freelancers and contractors doing this are people too, right? Regardless of where they are, and they're in it to work for a living, and they're all competing on the same marketplaces, right? So what that means is supply and demand dictates what they're doing, right? So what does that mean? So basically, everyone has a price, right? Below which you're not going to be happy, right? So, if whatever that price is, right, $30 an hour or whatever, right, 20, who knows, right? It's different by country, but below that point, right, and any developer would be able to work out what his hourly rate is, and if whether you're doing a fixed bid project that goes overtime because you underspecified, or they ended up lowballing something and then you ended up selecting them, right? The point is that below a certain price point, those developers or people doing the work are essentially going to be unhappy and uninterested. And we know for a fact, because I'm watching, the way this one particular team does their outsourcing here. They've been able to entice other contractors and outsourced engineers to basically work on their projects instead of other projects, and cause other projects to slip, right? Because they're offering a little bit more money. And it's a fact that if you close a deal and you're working with engineers that are uninterested, you're paying them a low rate, it's really your own deliverable that's going to be put into jeopardy. And it's not to say you're not going to get the deliverable, right? They're eventually going to get it to you. Nobody wants a bad rating or a bad reputation on Elance, but their attention is going to be divided. And, like one way or another, a lot of the people who go to outsource stuff, they pick the cheapest price or whatever, or they force a fixed price situation that's low, and then it ends up amortizing to be a fairly low hourly rate, then it usually ends up with a poor deliverable. So it's not just about hourly rate, right? You should always be cognizant when you're doing these things as a product manager. Like how long has that been out there? Is our deadlines being slipped there because it's impacting the amortized amount that they're being paid, right? Or was it a lowball project for which they're not interested in to begin with, right? That is stuff that directly risks puts at risk your overall product that you're handling on your side. So you should have like a calculated point where you're checking in. You're checking in with the project manager. Are they delayed here? Or is the rate so low that it's causing them grief, right? So basically, just be aware that what you want is to be aware of that situation. So lastly, probably a lot of people wondering like what are typical amounts for outsourced developers? That I get asked that a lot, and so what I've seen here from asking around is $35 to $40 an hour is typical to secure the continued loyalty of an outsourced dev, right? And these are folks that if you pay them, 35 to 40 bucks an hour, they'll easily work 70, 80 hours a week and be entirely happy. And in terms of fixed salary per week, for example, someone doing a PSD to responsive conversion, folks have told me that's $200 to $300 a week to buy about 10 to 15 hours of work. Perhaps about 100 hours would be like 4 hours of work for this kind of graphical to basic web conversion. But for a good dev, probably about $1,600 a week is typical from what I've seen. So I think that's it for the slides. Let me double check. Yep, that's my last slide. So over to you, Jeremy, to field questions.
Cool. So as always, also for everyone listening, the presentation will be posted to our SlideShare channel too. And again, thank you to our speaker, Calvin Chu, Managing Director at RGA Accelerator, powered by Techstars, who will also be joining us for session 2, and for today's discussion on tactical outsourcing. And as I just learned a short while ago, you can also read more about Calvin and many of his adventures and exploits through at the RGA Accelerator on CNN.com. You can definitely learn a lot more about what the really cool stuff and companies he's working with there. And again, a big thank you to me, Jeremy Horn, the product guy, to everyone else who joined us today, and the product mentor. And don't forget, if you're interested in being a product mentor, we've got a new session coming up pretty darn soon, and you want to be a product mentor just like today's speaker, our awesome Calvin. Sign up today at theproductmentor.com. And also, if you are looking to fill a product job with a great product person, or vice versa, definitely check out our free board. It's a free job board we do just for product people, and that you can find at theproductjobs.com. And again, everyone, Thanks a lot, and see you guys all next time. Bye.